Good morning. Today we're going to talk about several different methods for making trees fit into your space and sometimes making them more productive in the process. So there are various methods of basically playing with tree shapes to make them work in your yard. And the three versions of this that I'm going to talk about, one is called Coppicing, the second is called Pollarding, and the third is called Espallier. So these are three different methods, and each one has its own techniques. I have started to play with Espallier and with Coppicing, and I'm probably going to start to play with Pollarding in the near future. So what are they? First, we'll talk about coppicing. Coppicing is a really old traditional method of reusing the roots of a tree. So the idea is that you let a tree grow to a certain height, and then you cut it off just above the roots, above the ground. And with certain kinds of trees, this will let them regenerate or encourage them to regenerate new growth from that cut off sections or that stump there. They will regrow from that and form new trunks, but this time multiple trunks. Then in several years, you harvest again to do the same thing. And you can do this repeatedly over and over and over again for literally thousands of years with certain kinds of trees. And some have been coppiced for that long. This is traditional silviculture technique that was used and still is used to a certain extent in the UK and also in Germany. The word copse, which you might think of as like a woodland, well, that actually means a coppiced woodland. So traditionally these areas they would let them regrow, and in some cases, I'm not sure if this is always traditional, but they do this now in areas where they're doing coppicing. So they only harvest a certain section. So you have a very diverse, vibrant kind of area of woodland with many different levels of growth, which those different levels of growth actually really promote the wildlife in that area. It's also because it's densely packed, it gives wildlife a lot of space where they can be protected and sheltered and raise their young. So now that this has become less popular, a lot of that wildlife is not as abundant. So this traditional technique used to really work with nature to produce lots and lots of life, to fill an area with lots of life. And now it's been neglected. And so many of these copses have grown into sort of overgrown, and they're not productive. They're not as diverse in terms of the wildlife there. So it's kind of a shame. So this is a management technique that you can use. Now, what is the wood used for? Well, traditionally it was used as firewood. That was a big reason that you would have a copse, was to have firewood. Also used for making things like dowels and poles and things that you would use for building purposes and for woodworking. So there used to be a whole lot more demand for that, and so the demand for copses was quite large, especially when they didn't have well, in the UK, they didn't have lots of old growth forests that they could always draw on for lots and lots of timber. So these copses would provide for those needs in terms of firewood and that sort of thing. So it can produce very a dowel produced this way would be stronger than a dowel that was cut out of a larger piece of wood, because in this case you'd have all those very tight rings, and it's just a stronger pole. Now, anyway, very valuable technique for that. It can also be used and it's used for other types of trees too. Like in my case, the reason that I am starting to work with coppicing techniques is for my sweet birch, my black birch tree, where I want to produce lots and lots of twigs for that purpose. And so this is a good way for me to keep the twigs at an accessible height and always be able to reach them and produce more in a small space than I would if I let them grow on just one stem, one trunk. So in any case, that's what I'm using it for. They also use it for, I know they use one of the other techniques. I don't want to jump ahead of myself, so I'll skip that thought and move forward to pollarding. Same general principle, except on pollarding, you're doing it further up on the tree. So you let the tree get taller, and then you pretty much cut off the top, and then you continue to cut off the branches as they get to whatever desired dimension you want, and you cut them off and they continue to bud out. Now this only works with certain kinds of trees, once again. So like the beech tree, the oak, the maple, black locust, those work really well with it. And linden works really well with that. Some trees will not. Some trees will actually, if you cut them off at the top, will grow back from the base. And so that's might be a more appropriate tree for coppicing, not so much for pollarding. And this is traditionally in Europe, it was used as a way to grow forage for your livestock, but keep it kind of out of reach of them. So, they could eat the grass around, but they couldn't reach up to get all of the leaves and things above. So you could feed that to them whenever you wanted to. It was, kind of a means of restricting them from eating all of the forage in one spot. So you could then cut the branches, and then they could eat these leaves instead of just eating the grass all around all the time. So it was just an additional way of feeding your cattle. Also, though, it was used for the same purposes I'm talking about as firewood and means of production for anything that you would want to use wood, especially small scale dowel size wood for. And one of the real benefits of burning smaller diameter twigs is that they burn a whole lot hotter. And when they burn hotter, that means that there's not as much pollution given off. There's not as much waste in terms of smoke. You get more heat, more bang for your buck for your twigs than you do actually trying to burn a large log. Amazingly enough, that's just the way that it works. It will burn quicker, but it will burn hotter. And so if you have a situation like permaculture, quite often people make creative cooking designs, like things like rocket stoves. And in a rocket stove, if you are feeding that sticks, which is generally what you would feed a rocket stove, that will produce a whole lot more heat from less material, a whole lot less waste in terms of just the smoke that is actually a sign of waste in your burning process. And so then you can capture more heat in your system. But that's a topic for another day. In any case, many uses for small dowel size, or even as big as this big around. And it depends on the use how soon they would cut. So the third technique I want to talk about is called espalier. And that's something that I've played with a little bit. That is basically, you grow your tree and attach it to some sort of frame or some way of keeping the branches flat. So you're growing it in a single plane. You're not growing it in 3 dimensions. You're growing it in a single plane. This is great as a space-saving technique. It's also used to grow fruit trees against a stone wall, which will retain the heat of the sun and can allow you to grow warmer climate fruit in a cooler climate. So you might be able to extend your hardiness zone just a little bit by using an espalier technique. I have played with this for defining spaces at our place in my parents' cottage on the Cape Cod. We have 3 pear trees, and when we got them, maybe 2013 or 14, I started cutting them in kind of a semicircle. The idea being that I wanted to create a situation where we would shade ourselves from the sun when we were sitting at our picnic table, but also produce fruit. And that has worked spectacularly well. The fruit trees produce an awful lot. We got 100 pears off of these 3 fruit trees last year. It was the 2nd year that they had started producing. And so now they're producing an awful lot of fruit. I'll tell you, it's so easy to harvest the fruit off of an espalier tree. If you've ever tried to pick all of the fruit off of an apple tree that was grown traditionally, you're reaching all over the place. You've got your ladder up here, your ladder up there. You're doing damage to the tree as you're moving your ladder. You're knocking apples down. I keep this whole structure at just above my head level so I can reach any fruit that grows on it. And I keep it in a flat, kind of semicircular but flat, 2-dimensional sort of plane. And I can run around and harvest 100 pears in just a matter of minutes. Super easy. So if you're looking for ease of use, it's a great way to handle it. Now, you're probably going to want to prune your trees anyhow. And designing them in an espalier fashion keeps the branches horizontal to the earth. And when they are horizontal, they tend to produce more fruit. At least this is what I understand. In any case, it seems to work really well. It's working great for these pear trees. I'm thrilled with the way that it's turned out. But the added benefit is we've got these 3 pear trees. They cast shade where we need the shade, but they're not extending out into the areas that we don't want them to extend to. So they don't take up much space at all in the yard. But they provide us a nice archway that we can walk through and lots of fruit. So, and it seems like it would take a lot of work, but in this case, because it's right next to the picnic table, after lunch or whatever, I'll hop up and just maybe move one of the branches now. It's not attached to anything at this point. It's self-supporting. And then once a year, I will just lop off everything on the top and a few things on the sides just to keep it in the right framework. And I'm done. Now, this is not it's not a traditional espalier in that I've let the branches grow a little more thickly just because I'm looking for the shading from this hedge in a sense. And so you would, in a traditional espalier, it's much more like you would just have one couple branches going in either direction, then a little further up you'd have another. It's a very decorative kind of way of pruning your tree. I'm not quite that particular with it, but what I do want is for this thing to just stay flat. And it's so easy for me to keep this thing flat. It really is. It takes almost no effort on my part. And now that it's self-supporting, I don't need to kind of pull it down and move, maneuver with ties and things like that. Now it keeps to its shape. I can use the existing branches to help pull down the branches that I want to weave in, and it's so easy to maintain. So just something to think about if you have limited space. Espalier and Coppicing potentially, but also Pollarding. They are techniques that you can use to maximize your production in a small space. And one of the things I wanted to just add too is that by doing this sort of aggressive pruning, you extend the life of your tree because they stay in a semi-juvenile state. and so they can live for a long time. Now, I mentioned that with the coppice. The same is true with the pollard, but maybe not quite to the same extent. But the reason that this works so well at producing so much biomass in such a small space is because even though you don't have a whole lot of the tree showing above ground, you will have this great network, established network that's not being pruned below ground of roots. So the roots are kind of outperforming the above ground portion. And so when they're ready to send up new shoots, they send them up quickly and just a very strong production of wood, because there's so much, there's like this powerhouse engine of roots underneath the ground. Whereas if you were starting a new tree from seed every time, you've got to build that root system every time. So that's why this makes sense. It's, if you want to grow trees fast, you'll do much better growing them in a coppice situation than in a traditional plant from seed, or, you know, buy a bare root tree and plant it. Planting once and then cutting it back and letting it grow again is a very, very efficient way of doing it. So just something to think about. And now I would like you to, before you go and do this, make sure you research any tree that you are thinking about using this technique on and make sure that it's appropriate for it. Espalier won't be appropriate for every type of fruit tree. It won't work with a fig because the fig is going to grow too fast and doesn't have the same sort of growth structure, but it works really well with apple trees, pear trees, Asian pears. It can work with, I'm not sure though, I can't say for sure with an Asian pear. I'm starting to try it with Asian pears, so I hope it will work. And it, you know, could potentially work with, say, a cherry tree. I'm not sure if it would or not, so double check. But there are a lot of possibilities for using these pruning techniques in your landscape to help you maximize your space and maximize the energy that is retained in your system. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you will give me a thumbs up here and let me know what you know about coppicing, pollarding, and also espalier. Have you experimented with these techniques? Did I say anything that doesn't match your experience? And if so, please share that so we can share it with the community. Just in the comments below, that would be great. And take a look at foodforestgardenclub.org. Having a lot of fun there. Hope you'll join us. In the meantime, have a great day.